All right, welcome everybody. Mike Hamilton here, Vice President of Product Evangelism here at MadCap Software, and we have got a good one for you today. For those who haven't been to our webinars before, welcome. For those of you returning, then welcome back. My pleasure to announce that today's webinar is going to be by somebody you may have heard from before if you've viewed previous webinars, but Daniel Ferguson, who runs his own private firm, Smart Output, but is also a certified Flare instructor, is going to present to us today on CSS. Now, if you've heard any of my webinars, you know this is kind of my sweet spot as well. CSS is really the secret sauce for getting the most out of Flare authoring. So I'm kind of excited to hear what Daniel has to tell us today. He'll be presenting on specifically markers or the marker pseudo class in CSS. So this is going to be a good one. However, before we start, we do have a little bit of housekeeping like usual. Before we get, 100 questions in the Q&A panel, yes, this webinar will be recorded. All of our webinars are recorded and they are stored up on our website, so anybody can go view them at any time. And by simply registering, you will be receiving an email with a link to that recording as soon as it gets posted. That way you can go back and you review some details if you need to. Also, if this is your first time attending one of our webinars, in the GoToWebinar interface, there is a tab labeled Questions. If you open that tab, there's kind of a field where you can actually type questions in. With this many attendees, we can't keep your microphones open. Apologies for that. There's just too much background noise. But you can ask questions throughout the presentation just by typing into that questions panel. Now, to set expectations, though, Daniel typically won't be responding to those questions in real time. Once we get to the end of the presentation, well, then we will go back and we'll see if there are any of those questions that we need to address that did not get addressed in the actual presentation. But with that housekeeping out of the way, let me turn it over to Daniel Ferguson to educate us on markers.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Mike. And welcome everybody back to the MadCap webinar series. I'm thrilled to be here again. I've given quite a few of these in the past, and it's a great experience every time. Here's how to get in touch with me. If you want to get in touch with me directly after the webinar, feel free to send me an email or whatever. If you have questions, though, like Mike said, during the webinar, please put it in the questions panel here, right? So that everybody gets the chance to address their questions, and we will have some time at the end of this for me to go through the questions and answer them. If after the fact, though, you just want to connect on LinkedIn or you have another specific question or something, feel free to just get in touch with me. So I want to start by just a little bit of my story and how this webinar came about. So Mike mentioned that I run my own consulting business. I do a lot of Flare consulting and training. In fact, that's primarily what I do. There's a few other ancillary things here and there that I do as well, but most of it is centered around Flare. And I routinely, over the past number of years, have had a number of clients ask me, hey, can we change the style of our bullets? Can we make them blue, or use a different picture other than a circle or a square or something? Or hey, can we change what our numbers look like in our numbered lists? For some reason, a lot of people say, I don't want the period there. And maybe you're one of them, I'm not sure. And my answer to that over the past number of years has been, well, yeah, we can do that. But we need to jump through some hoops generally to get that done. Well, I had another request come in of this nature back, it was in December. I think it's December last year. It was a few months ago. And they specifically wanted a numbered list style where the numbers, right, the markers on the list were blue, bold, and had no period. And what first went through my mind is, oh, here we go again. I'm going to need to tell them that it's either not possible or that we need to switch everything to auto-numbered paragraphs, which just really wasn't an option in their case, and isn't an option in a lot of people's cases who are using real ordered lists and numbered lists, unordered lists. But I said I would look into it again, and so I did. And much to my surprise, I discovered the marker pseudo class in CSS. Now, I was excited to see this initially, but what first ran through my mind is, this will work in HTML, but there's no way this is going to work in PDF, right? But I thought I'll give it a go and put it in place and built the styles and the style sheet and everything, built the PDF output, and amazingly, like I was just absolutely thrilled. It worked, and it looked spectacular. And I was like, wow, I think we finally have an answer on how we can easily change the look of these markers on lists and still continue to use ordered lists and unordered lists in our topics rather than auto-numbered paragraphs. So I've done a little bit more digging into this, and what I'm going to do today is introduce you, right, to the marker pseudo class. Now, if you're not familiar with what a pseudo class is, don't worry about that at this point. We're going to get into it. Almost all my presentation today is going to be demo. So you're going to see me working in Flare. You're going to see me working in style sheets. We're going to build a couple of targets, and you'll see how all this works and how all of this comes together. So to start with, what is the marker CSS pseudo element? Well, here's the definition that I took from Mozilla. It's a pseudo element that selects the marker box of a list item, which typically contains a bullet or a number. Now, this marker property also works on any element that you set the display to list item. We're not going to go there at this point. In fact, I haven't found a compelling reason to use this display list item, because most of what we can, the numbering things we need in Flare, we can do with Flare's auto numbering capability. But auto numbering doesn't cover unordered lists and ordered lists. And so that's where we're going to cover. So what does it mean, like the markers? Well, here's an example of what we typically find, right? When we look at our Flare, here are markers for a bulleted list. These ones are set to squares. We do have some capability in customizing these. You can turn them to discs. You can turn them to circles. There's a few other things. And down here is of course, at the bottom is the numbered list with our just steps 1, 2, and 3. These here are the markers. The bullets and the numbers are called markers. And I'll show you an example here, a CSS selector that looks like this, list item : marker, we can select these markers without selecting anything else in the list item. And so this CSS selector gives us the capability to just point directly to those markers and say, you know what, I want to do some customization to these markers themselves and just leave everything else alone. And like I mentioned, this works in both HTML outputs and PDF outputs. It's really fun, it's really cool, it's really powerful. And it's quite, relatively easy to use, certainly easier than it used to be having to go in and putting list style images or, like I said, doing auto-numbered paragraphs or that type of thing. Now, that said, this is a bit new, the marker CSS pseudo class, not totally new. It's got quite strong browser support right now. Really, the only place I've seen is if you have to, for some reason, keep supporting Internet Explorer. First of all, I'm sorry if you do, but if you do, then this isn't going to work for you. Also, in Safari on Mac, it's not fully supported yet, but it's getting there. And all of what I'm going to show you works for Safari. There's nothing I found that doesn't work, but you'll just want to check it, right? If that's a browser you need to support, after you build this out and you create your markers, you just want to check it in the Safari browser just to make sure it's working okay. I haven't seen any issues in any of these browsers so far, in anything that I have, that I personally have done or personally have tested. In this webinar, I'm going to get into some sort of more advanced CSS selectors, and I'll be pointing those out as I create them, as I actually write them. You'll see me actually create the selectors. I'll be describing them as I create them. If your level of experience with CSS isn't strong right now, maybe you're kind of at the beginner level or maybe the sort of intermediate level. If some of this starts to kind of go over your head, don't worry, just stick with me. I'll explain it as I'll go. And if after the webinar you feel like maybe you didn't quite grasp it all, I would recommend going back and watching this webinar that's on my screen here. It's a recorded webinar I did a few years back, specifically about CSS selectors. And this is one area where, Mike said CSS is the secret sauce. I think one of the primary areas where Flare users can really beef up their expertise is with CSS selectors, not only just with properties, but with selectors. And so just if it starts to get into a realm where you're not familiar when it comes to CSS, and I'm going to be working primarily in code today, I'm also going to show you how to do what I'm going to do in the CSS Flare, in the Flare CSS editor, right? So if you're not comfortable with working in code, that's totally fine. Everything I'm going to show you can be done in the CSS editor, and I'll show you how and where those properties come up. I'm going to work in code just because that's what I'm familiar with, it's what I'm comfortable with, and it's a little bit faster, right? So I'll be able to cover some more content here as we go through. But there's this resource out on the webinar website, and there's a ton of other CSS stuff out there. This is a great area. If you have an hour on a Friday afternoon and your brain is fried from working, pull up one of these CSS webinars, right, and let your CSS skill develop. So with that, I am going to close down the presentation here, and we're going to jump right into a demo. Now, let me just explain to you what you're seeing on your screen. Over here, of course, on the left is my Flare window. On the right, I've got a code editor open called Visual Studio Code. You do not need to use this. You can just as easily just use the Flare style sheet editor. I'm going to open it up right now, or and you can use this, or you can open up your style sheet in the internal text editor. Any one of these will work. I'm using this over here because it's a little bit more robust of an editor, has some autocomplete features and things like that, makes things just a touch easier. And like I said, it's just kind of what I'm accustomed to. But everything that I'm doing over here, you do not need to use this tool. You can do everything in Flare. I also like that I can just kind of set it up side by side here, and we can look at it. So that's what you're seeing on your screen. And I've got just a rudimentary style sheet set up. I've got some variables up here, which I'll come back and talk about those, and then just some styles here that's styling this very simple page. Okay, so let's get started. So I've got a simple couple of lists here on this topic. I've got an unordered list and I've got an ordered list. And these are out of the box. This is how these markers come styled out of the box. We're going to start with the easy one, which is the bulleted list. And the reason why this one is easy is because we don't have to worry about sequence like we do with the ordered list. So we're going to come back to the ordered list in just a minute. We're going to start with the bulleted list. So let's say that we want to change this marker in such a way that we can't do with something like the list style type property. Let me show you what I mean. So let's say that in our unordered list, we want to select our list items and we want to change it to squares, right? We can do that with list style type and change it to something like square, for example. And if I save that, it's going to change these to squares. We do have that, some limited capability. I could turn it to squares, I could turn it to circles, things like that. And if that's all you need, that's great. You can run with that and off you go. But if you want something a little bit more, if you want, right, a list style type that isn't defined necessarily by the CSS specification and you want to put your own in, or if you need to change the color of these things, then what you'll want to do is use the marker pseudo class. So I'm just going to delete this list style type. We're not going to be using this. And I'm going to turn this CSS selector into a marker pseudo class. So I'm just going to push : and then type marker. And there it is. Whoops. Right. So now what we have is a selector that selects the markers of list items that are in an unordered list. And all of these elements here that you see in this selector string correspond back to elements that are in your Flare topic. So here's our UL, for example. Here's our LI. Here's where we see our UL and our LI. And then this pseudo class, as I described earlier, just selects this bullet. So let's go change it to something else. The way you do this is you use the content property. So I'm going to hit content : and then put in some single quotes, and I can put anything I want right in here into these single quotes and content. I have a website out here that I like to refer to that has all these HTML entities. These are Unicode characters. And I've actually bookmarked a couple. Let's go say, I'll say that I want to grab maybe this character and I want to use this as my bullet. And by the way, I'll give you the if you want to use the same website, but you can literally find this, copy it, and come back here and paste it directly into your style sheet, save your style sheet, and now all of a sudden you have a different style of bullet. It's literally using this Unicode character. And I can do that with anything that I can find. If I want to change it to stars, I can do that. So I can go paste the star in here, right? And now my bullets are stars. And if you look back on this page, I mean, there's like almost 1,500 of these. Now, most of them you wouldn't use, but there's a lot of them that are perfectly acceptable and usable and would be great for bullets. I've saved a few here. Here's an actual bullet. I can just put that one in too. Let's say I just wanted to turn my bullets a different color, so maybe I just use the same bullet for my content. Whoops. Save that. They're a little small. I'll show you how to make them bigger. But with that in place, I can now change, say, the color. So I'm going to change the color, and I will change it to, I've got some color variables up there. You see them up here. So I'll change it to, say, my secondary color, maybe. Maybe we'll see if that stands out enough for you guys to be able to see it. So I'll put this variable in and save that. Really hard to see, but my lists are now green, but my bullets are green. I can increase the size of those bullets with font size. I can change it to, say, 150%, right? And I can increase the size of the bullets themselves. Now these ones are a little small. I'm going to switch back to, let's go to, we'll just go back to this one. This one is actually quite common. I see a lot of people who like to use this for their bullet style for some reason. Let me put that back in. Whoops. Didn't copy it quite right. Give me just a second. Copy, paste that back into my content. We'll save that. And now we're back to, you know, that bullet style. And I don't know if you can see through the web conference that it's green, but it is. And so I was able to change the content, the color, and the size just using CSS here. I didn't have to fiddle with the list style image. I didn't have to do anything other than that. This font size for this one, maybe I don't want it. Maybe I'm okay with, you know, having it these normal sizes. Maybe I want it a little bit bigger, maybe 120%, anything like that. You can fiddle with it and you can see what works for you, what's best for your bullet styles. So you can see how easy this is, right? To come in and customize your bullet style. And like I said, you can put anything you want here in content. You can even type in a word if you want. I don't know why you would for bullets. We're going to look at that for steps when we get there, because there are maybe some compelling cases where you want to have some words in your step numbering, potentially, right? But you just do all of this with CSS now. And it makes it really quick and really easy. And like I said before, for me, one of the major compelling advantages to this is that it works in Flare PDF output as well as HTML output. We're going to look at that in just a minute, because there's a couple things we need to consider that I'll show you when we build the target. Now, what if we have nested lists under here? I'm going to go ahead and put a nested list under bullet 2, right? So I'm going to just press enter and put in another list. And you see it inherits the same bullet style, because this selector also selects this, right? This is a list item within an unordered list. If we want a different style here, and this has nothing to do really with the marker CSS pseudo class as much as just understanding how selectors work, we can create another selector that looks like this, UL space UL, right? And then LI marker. In fact, I'm going to go change this one too, so that it is a little bit more specific. This, what I just put in, is covered in that other webinar that I pointed you to. This is called a Descendant Selector, right? And so you can go look up what that is. But now I'll just copy these just for the sake of being quick. But I can come in and I can create a different list style. I'll just grab maybe just this dash. In fact, you know, I'll just type in a dash, and you'll see we can just put a dash in there, save that, and now my second level are dashes, right? And so you can get specific, and you can have different marker styles based on where the list is, if it's nested into another list. And again, kind of hard to see. Maybe I could zoom this in a little bit. Oh, there, that's a lot better. Now you can see it. Maybe you can see that green color coming through. So that is a very brief overview. Oh, let me show you one other thing. Maybe we can create, I'm going to put in another unordered list. And you see it's already inheriting. It's inheriting the properties because I have it defined here. I'm going to create a class of unordered lists. So let's say we have UL, and I'll call it check, right? And for this one, marker, let's say that I want to use this check mark character right here, this one that I have saved. Copy that, come paste it here into my content, and I'll save this. And now I have an unordered list class that I can go apply ul.check, and I now have a check mark, right? Instead of these characters up here. And maybe I don't want it green. I can, again, change the color to something else. Maybe this one I want to be red or whatever. And I now have red checkmark bullets. Super quick, super easy. And the marker pseudo class makes this a very, very much simpler thing to do than it used to be. Now I want to really quick just build a couple of targets. So we're going to build both HTML and PDF. This is the only topic in this whole project, and so these should build really quickly. And I will point out to you as we look at this, some things that you'll need to consider as these build. So we're going to look at PDF first. Let me open that up. And you see how this comes through cleanly, very cleanly and beautifully in PDF. If I zoom in even, you see these come through with just complete clarity and fidelity. There's no fuzziness, there's no nothing. There may be some spacing issues here that you want to go deal with in terms of like margin or padding. Maybe with the bullet, the check bullet class, we need a different margin left. But you see them working in PDF. Now what I want to point out, let me close this. If we look at HTML, we definitely have some spacing issues. And I don't know why this particular one didn't work quite right. I'll need to go look into that. For some reason, it didn't build the CSS quite right, but we clearly have some spacing issues. Let me zoom in so you can see this, where we need more space. At least I think we do, between the bullets and the text, right? And so you, as you work with markers, you may have some things like this, where the spacing varies between PDF and between HTML. And so we need to account for that. Now I'm just going to use the developer tools in the browser. I'm going to inspect it, right? And I'm going to just put in manually here some padding, which will give some space between the bullet and the text, just to see what looks good. And then I'm going to back that out and put it into my Flare style sheet. So if you haven't used this before, this is a really, really handy tool to use, developer tools. I'm going to put in some padding, and I'll just guess like 10 pixels. Okay, I think that looks fine. So now that I know that 10 pixels looks good, and then I can fix it with padding left, I'm going to come back into my style sheet. And I'm going to say, okay, for list items, in fact, I'll just put it right here. I have a list item selector already. Let's put in padding left of 10 pixels. Okay. And you see some space increase there. Now, this is also going to apply to my PDF output. I actually thought PDF looked pretty good. I probably don't want an additional 10 pixels of padding on my PDF output. So I'm going to come down into the bottom here of my style sheet, and I'm going to create a print medium, right? And for list items in my print medium, I'm going to set the padding left back to 0. So this will keep that 10 pixel padding left from being applied to list items when I generate my PDF target. It'll only apply it when I generate my my HTML target, because of the way I have my style sheet set up. And that's how, you know, Flare sets up its style sheets by default. Everything in the default section applies to HTML output, and things in the print medium apply to the print output. There's a chance that you may have this set up differently in your style sheet, so you'll just need to pay attention to that. But just recognize that in terms of spacing these, you may have some variation you need to deal with between print and HTML, but it's easily resolvable. Now, before I go much further, I just want to point these things out in the Flare style sheet editor. So if I come back here and look at I'm going to open up the Flare style sheet editor. First of all, I'm going to find these selectors, like on line 47, 53, and 58. These are going to be in my complex selectors dropdown right here. You see them here, here, and here. And you see, so I've got like ul.check li marker selected here. You see the exact same properties represented here in the style sheet editor as what I put here in the style sheet itself. You do not need to use code to do this. You can create these selectors. You just add a selector, and you literally type in the selector here that you want to create, and then click OK. It creates a selector. and then you can add whatever properties you want, and you can take those Unicode characters like I was showing you and copy them and paste them right here into this field. So if you don't want to use the code editor, then don't. Just use the Flare CSS editor. Like I said, I just use the code because I'm more accustomed to it. It's a little quicker for me, and I'll be able to show more stuff, you know, I think in this webinar by using the code editor rather than just the Flare CSS editor. So you can go through each of these selectors and you can see exactly the exact same settings as what I have over here in the code. So no need to go into the code if you don't want to. Okay, so that is unordered lists. Now let's look at ordered lists because these ones are a little bit more complex. So I'm going to come down here in my style sheet and I'm going to create a selector OL LI marker. This is going to select list item markers in ordered lists. Now, I'm going to do the same thing here where I'm going to tell it what content that I want to put in it. Now, this is where ordered lists get a little bit more complex because within our content, we have to use a counter because these need to be counted sequentially. So what that looks like is you literally type counter and then in parentheses, list item. Now counters can be much more complex than what I just showed you. Usually you kind of define counters, you give them a name. In fact, you can do everything with counters that Flare auto numbering can do, but it gets a lot more involved and a lot more complex. This is all we really need to show for our perspective, or for what we're talking about, because we already have the Flare auto numbering feature, so we don't really need to get in to numbering things other than just list items. So what this is going to do is for the content, it's going to initiate a counter, and it's just going to list the list items in order. So I'm going to save this, and you see right away, I don't know if you saw that or not, maybe let me undo it really quick. Actually, let me take this, let me turn this off and save this. Okay, so look at our list items over here, right? Regular out-of-the-box list items, no big deal. Now, when I save this style sheet, I want you to keep your eye on these numbers. So I'm going to save it right now, and you see the period just vanished. And the reason why it's not there is because in the content property, I haven't told it to put it there. And so I now have a list, right, with no periods. Now, if I wanted to put it back in, I can put any string I want. Just like we did up here, this is technically a string. It's the exact same syntax. So I would just put in my single quotes, and then I could put my period back in if that's what I wanted. And it's there now. But I wouldn't have to use a period. If I wanted to, I could put, say, a dash, or I could put a parenthesis like this, right? There's no limit on what I can do. I can also say I want these to be bold. You know, let's see, I'll turn them bold. And now my markers are bold. I could turn these into a different color as well if I wanted to. We'll just grab that secondary color again. We'll just grab this whole thing. Save that. They're now this green color, same thing as the bullets, right? And I can go through and I can adjust various properties. Now, if you're a little bit familiar with CSS, you're probably noticing that this is very similar to the before pseudo class. It is very similar to it. It's not as powerful as the before pseudo class, but the reason I love it is for two reasons. One, it is specifically for markers, and two, it works in PDF output. So if I go build this into PDF, this is what you will see, right? So I can put any string I want in here. You saw me, I've got a parentheses in here right now. Maybe I don't want that. Maybe I don't want anything right here. I'll take that back off. This here is very similar to what my client wanted. You know, when the story that I started with, they wanted something like this. And honestly, it did look very, very nice in their PDF output. Now, let me show you one more thing here, a couple more things. The first is, let's look at the nested list scenario here. Let's say I need steps A and B under step 1. So I need step A and I need step B. And I obviously have some spacing issues here that I would need to go adjust, probably from, let me just see if I can fix this just to get some formality really quick. If we just take this and put the same margin on that and save it. Not really. I'm not going to bug with that right now because we're not focused on spacing issues right now. But we have numbers 1 and 2, and what if I want A and B? So let me show you how to account for that. So I'm going to create another selector, very similar in construct to this one, where I'm going to take ordered lists that are nested within other ordered lists, and I'm going to select the marker for those. Now in this case, I'm going to define as the content, yes, it needs to be a counter, of course. It needs to be a list item, but after list item, I can just put a comma and say, I want these ones to be lower alpha. And save that, and let me see what I did wrong. Give me just a second. List item, counter, content. Does anybody see what I'm doing wrong here? The demo gods strike. OL marker, open, close, content, counter, list item, lower alpha. I'm not exactly sure what I am doing wrong here with this. It looks exactly like what I did before. So I will need to see what the problem is with that. I'm going to build it and just see if we get the same issue. We'll rebuild the HTML and we'll look at an HTML and see what I've done, what I may have done wrong. Oh, hello. I need to select the list item. That's what we need to do. Okay, now we have A and B. And so in the counter, in this content counter, you can specify what you want them to be, and this will accept anything that you can specify as a list style type in CSS. So you could put lower Roman, you could put, well, lower Roman and lower alpha are really the only two that we use in this construct. And so that's how you do like a nested numbered list. Now, one thing I have seen before is somebody wanted to come in and add a string before the counter. And so what it looked like was this. They actually used the word step. And we'll put the space in right there. And you can't see it in here. Let me build it because this is an example where we need to come and deal with margin and padding, right? Because it just pushes it out to the left, and so we need to add some margin. So let's have a look at the output. You see right here, we do get the word step 1, step 2, step 3. The alignment is all off, so it's the same process here where I'm going to look at this and say, okay, what do I need to do here? You know, with this ordered list, for example, if I'm going to use these step numbers, I need to adjust the spacing. Obviously, I probably need some more margin left and maybe bump it up to 20 pixels. Looks like maybe even more than that, that type of thing, where you need to come in here. And if you're going to have, you know, where you're going to put additional string content in here, you may need to come in here and just tweak with your margins and padding a little bit just to get it lined up just like you like. So I may take that margin left 40 pixels and go put it back into my style sheet here for OLs. I probably wouldn't, I mean, I might have something like this where if it's a step ordered list, maybe I give it the margin, and if it's a regular ordered list, maybe I don't, and maybe all of these are also, you know, step classes, so I can have both regular ordered lists and step ordered list if I wanted to. And then I just come apply the, the style class here to this ordered list to get the spacing and the margin correct as I, as I think would look good. So a lot of flexibility here in what you're able to do. And if we look, again, if we look at the actual underlying code of this, there's nothing fancy here. We have, a couple style classes that I applied, and this one doesn't even have a class. And then you see what's going on in the style sheet. So we're pushing all of the styling for these markers into the style sheet where it belongs, and using the marker pseudo class, it opens up a lot of capability and flexibility that we can do in our style sheet to really do some cool things to these numbered lists. One thing I haven't shown, maybe I'll show that here, is changing the font family. And I actually went and found a fancy font. I think I just called it font fancy. So we'll use this variable called lobster. So let me put that in. And I can even change the font of these list items. I don't know, you'd ever do this in a technical manual with this particular font, but you can change the font too without affecting the font at all of the actual text of the list item. So that's another capability you have. So that is an introduction to the marker CSS pseudo class. And I hope as you watch this, you started to see maybe new possibilities of what you might be able to do with your lists. Maybe there's some of this you've wanted to do for a long time and just didn't know how or didn't have the capability to do it until this. This is, like I said, a fairly new, it's CSS, part of the CSS standard. It's got wide adoption now, that one little partial adoption by Safari and no adoption in Internet Explorer, right? So those little caveats, but I expect this, the capabilities of Marker to grow and also for further browser adoption to continue to happen. Again, I haven't seen any browser issues. I actually don't know what it is in Safari that is partially implemented, because everything that I've done works just fine in Safari. And so that's my experience with that. So with that, that is my presentation today. I thought it would be a touch shorter than normal. We've got, looks like about 18 minutes or so for questions. But before we jump to questions, let me pull this slide deck back up, right? And I think, Mike, you have got some exciting things to talk about.
All right. Thank you, sir. Before we get into the question and answer portion, like usual, just by attending a webinar, we always try to say some kind of thank you. So there is a sales promotion going on for those who might be in the market for some additional licenses. It's basically a buy 3, get 4 type of promotion. If that applies to your situation, all you have to do is call into sales and just mention that you attended this webinar on markers, and that will entitle you to that discount. And then also, we don't want people to forget that later in the year, we are still planning to march ahead with Mad World. Now, I realize some people aren't quite ready for, real world face-to-face gatherings yet. So we're going to be doing it as a hybrid conference. For those who feel it's okay to go ahead and, show up face-to-face, it will be held in Austin, Texas this year, October 3 through 6. However, there will also be an online attendance option as well. So if you've loved this webinar, if you like getting deep into the technical aspects of Flare, that type of information, as well as intermediate and beginner information, is well covered at Mad World. Only instead of 1 hour, imagine 2.5 full days of that type of coverage. And again, I don't want to scare people away either. We run multiple tracks at MadWorld. Usually at any time period, you have your choice. There's a beginner level session, an intermediate level session, and an advanced level session. And you can pick and choose, and you're not locked into any one track. You could go to, 3 or 4 beginner sessions if you want to, and then pop into an intermediate session in the afternoon. So MadWorld is going to be happening later this year in October. And I believe that's it for the announcements. And I do see quite a few questions popping in. I think most of the earlier questions I've been able to handle. There's only one that I did flag for follow-up, and that was somebody asking about using proportional fonts for their numbers in their lists, and then asking about some spacing issues. My take on that would be there are various techniques. You obviously have your padding values, but do you want to jump on that one, Daniel, or?
I can.
Okay.
Yeah, you bet. I don't know, specifically the question in terms of like proportional fonts. Well, you can't. Is that referring to like font size?
Well, what they were saying is because if it's a custom proportional font, the number 1 ends up literally touching the dot that comes after it. Is there a way to space that out using this technique?
You can put spaces inside of your content. Now, I think it's only going to take one space. I think if you want more than that, you have to go put in an actual code. If you need space between your marker and your text of your list item, do that using padding, right? Put some padding in between there. If you need space within, like if you have your 1 and then you have your period that's kind of crossing over into the 1, you're going to have to use that. You're going to have to insert that space somehow inside of this content property. Now, I know you can insert at least one space. And I started down the path, now that you asked this question, of seeing how to insert more, and I didn't get very far down the path, but I think there was a way where you can insert an actual, like a non-breaking space character or something, I believe. Maybe it isn't inside of quotes. Maybe you just put the character in there. I'd have to do a little more research on that one, Mike, to see. But I seem to recall, as I did a little bit of research on that it is possible. I just haven't done it, actually applied it. So I hope that answers the question as best as I can. Again, I need to look into it a little further.
No worries. There's a question from Kirsten. Would these techniques work with a compiled CHM file? Yikes, I can't imagine you did that testing.
No, I did not do that testing. I don't know if these work with the compiled CHM file. My guess would be no, but my guess was no with PDF too. So I don't know. We'd have to test it and see. That's a really good question. Should we try it?
My instinct is if it works, I'm going to be shocked.
But I will be too.
But I'll still give it a 10% chance. You never know.
Well, let's give it a try. I don't know. I haven't built CHM in quite a while, so I'm not exactly sure if I'm going to be able to just do it quickly here. But it doesn't hurt to try, right?
Yeah, the big question is, do you have the components to view it?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
All right, so while that build is going on, let me look ahead here.
No, it did not work in CHM.
There you go.
So, yep. Good question, though.
Okay, here's one I can grab by Robert. Should list items also always be paragraph elements, or can they just be LI elements? That is author's choice. the reason that Flare inserts the paragraph elements, at least that's one option, is because a lot of beginners don't realize the strictness of the CSS language. And so they might have a style class like p.note, and they go to apply that inside of a list and they can't, because it's a paragraph style, not a list style. So the reason that Flare inserts those additional paragraph elements is just to make it kinder to like beginning authors. They can still use their paragraph elements. Now, if you don't like them being there, all you have to do is right click on the OL or the UL block. And from the right click menu, you can actually select make simple items, and boop, those paragraphs disappear. If you want to make it so that they never come back when you insert a new list, I don't expect, Daniel to actually show this, but you could go up to the File tab. Once you're in the File tab, go to Options. Oh, he is going to show it. Cool beans. And then I believe it's under XML Editor. There we go. Go down to your lists, and you can choose whether Flare creates paragraph type lists or simple type lists when you insert a list. And that will just affect now, even if you change it to simple here, if you're ever in a situation where you want to convert to a paragraph type list again, that swap is available from the right click menu. Thank you, sir. That was awesome.
Yeah, right here. Turn this back into paragraph items. Great. Yep. Yeah, and whether these are simple items or paragraph items has nothing to do with the way that the marker works at all, as you just saw. I just turned them all into simple items, and the markers works just fine. So I agree with Mike. Whether to use paragraph or simple items is really personal preference. For me, I strongly prefer using paragraphs if I have content that follows, like that's all part of a big list item, like this one has a step and then additional content beneath it. I personally like using paragraph items for those, rather than having this out here just floating in the list item itself and then have some content beneath it. But even that's kind of personal preference. I just find it easier to work with paragraph items if I have complex lists. So.
All right, there's a question from Cheryl. Can you do like the nested list you demonstrated where it was step 1 and then AB? Could that nested list be bullets instead of another OL?
You bet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you would just, I don't have a bullet right here. But could this be a UL? Oh yeah, for sure. Yep. Now, obviously, I have some issues going on here, right? Where I've got, I don't know why I've got that, but yes, you can have bullets. That is bizarre. Sometimes I don't. I wonder why I do demos live sometimes. I'll need to go through. Because of this. Of this.
Yep.
There we go. So yes. So what I just did, this little thing that I just put in, what this said is only go one step deep in this entire ordered list. Only go to list items that are direct children of this ordered list with a step of class. Prior to it, I did not have that in, and so it was traversing the entire ordered list and finding every list item in the ordered list. Whereas when I put this in, it limits it. And so yes, you can definitely have unordered lists nested under, or unordered lists nested under ordered list items. That's very common. Again, some spacing issues, right, that I would probably go address if this were mine. But we saw how to deal with padding and margins, and you can go make those adjustments. Yep. Good question.
Now, again, I'm going to infer. We've had several questions. Will this work in Microsoft Word output targets? My gut feel is if it worked in PDF, there's probably a 90% chance it's going to work in Word. But again, if you didn't specifically test that, then obviously there's a chance it may not. We would actually have to do a Microsoft Word output build.
Yeah. Yeah, I did not test that. I only tested HTML and PDF. We could try it again. Let me copy it. I'll create a quick Word target. And we'll see what we get. So this one will be Word. And let me go change the target output type from PDF to Word. And let's give it a build and see what we get. Good questions. I definitely thought it should have thought to check Word, but I didn't, obviously.
Well, when worse comes to worse, you know, everybody needs a homework assignment. Just kidding.
No, I don't see it working in Word either. There may be some things we can do to get it to work in Word, though, but I don't see this working right out of the box in Word. So right now, it's just HTML and PDF that it's working in.
All right.
Any other questions there, Mike, or are we?
Well, there might be. There might be a couple more popping in. Let me scroll down to the bottom.
Okay.
Again, not to throw you under the bus because you're doing this live, but several people have taken issue with line 62. And I think you just made a typo. You're missing one colon there, and that confused a few people.
Sorry, everybody. By the way, most browsers, as you notice, will compensate for that. Even Flare does.
Yes.
And so you will see sometimes only one colon. That was a typo on my part. I didn't mean to do it, but you will see it sometimes, and the browsers do know how to render that. So same thing with 57.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would recommend using the double colon only because if you read the W3C specs, that's the official way.
Yep.
But as you've seen here, if you make a mistake, most browsers are pretty forgiving. Of course, with my luck, the customer would be using the one browser that wasn't. So I would recommend using the double if you can.
Yeah, that's a good catch. I always use the double. I just missed it on the demo. So thank you for pointing that out. That was a good catch.
All right. I think we are all caught up. And looking at our clock, I think we're down to about the hour. So as host and MC, I would like to give a special thanks to Daniel for taking his time and putting this great webinar together. Do you have any final parting thoughts?
I don't, other than I hope this was useful for you. If you have additional questions, feel free to get in touch. You could either send them to me or maybe even better to send them to Marissa or Mike if there's a way to get in touch with you so that we can circulate them back out to the rest of the attendees, right? And so, but if you have more questions, feel free to get in touch somehow and we'll get them answered.
Well, I will point out that the question and answer panel, any of those questions that were asked, those are recorded. We will be putting together a document with all of the answers that we provided. And so when you receive an email with the link to the recording, we will also be including any of the questions and any of the answers that were provided. So that will also be a resource available. But with that, thank you so much, everybody, for attending. Keep an eye on our schedule for upcoming webinars and events on our site. Looks like May 26th, we will have a webinar dealing with choosing a translation provider. And then June 16th, there's a webinar by some crazy guy named Mike Hamilton. I don't know, just something about building documentation portals. But if those are interesting, pop up to our website and sign up for those. But with that, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of today and an even better rest of your week. Cheers, everybody.